At the turn of the millennium, Leeds United was the most exciting force in football. They were a golden generation, dismantling the European elite and reaching the Champions League semi-finals. To the world, they were the next global dynasty. But behind the scenes, a catastrophic secret was rotting the club. The boardroom was playing a high-stakes game of Russian roulette, spending money that didn't even exist yet. This is the story of the most reckless gamble in sporting history. How a legendary institution was traded for a dream that turned into a billion-dollar nightmare. The madness began with a simple, dangerous assumption that the Champions League money would never stop flowing. Chairman Peter Ridsdale started spending like a man who had discovered an infinite gold mine. He broke the British transfer record for Rio Ferdinand and handed out massive contracts to anyone who could kick a ball. But there was a catch. This spending wasn't funded by profits, it was funded by massive loans from hedge funds. Ridsdale had lived the dream, mortgaging the club's future on the belief that Leeds would qualify for the Champions League every single year. It was a strategy built on hope rather than math, and the cracks were already starting to show. The scale of the financial recklessness inside Elland Road was almost beyond belief. It wasn't just about the record-breaking transfer fees for players like Robbie Fowler or Seth Johnson. It was the surreal, everyday waste of money that defined the era. Chairman Peter Ridsdale famously spent £20,000 of the club's money just on goldfish for his office. The club was paying for private jets to fly players across the country for minor appointments and handing out astronomical wages to benchwarmers that rivaled the top earners at Manchester United. But the real danger was buried in the fine print of their loans. Leeds had borrowed £60 million from major investment banks, using their future gate receipts and TV revenue as collateral. The entire business model relied on a single, fragile if. If they qualified for the Champions League every single season, they could just barely cover the interest. There was no plan B, no safety net. They were essentially betting the stadium, the training ground, and the club's very soul on a top-4 finish. In the boardroom, they called it living the dream. But on paper, they were building a house of cards in a hurricane. Every time they signed a new player on credit, the pressure on the manager and the squad grew until it became a suffocating weight that no team could carry. The breaking point arrived during the 2002 to 2003 season, and it was a cold, hard slap of reality. After the dizzying heights of the European semi-finals, the team finally faltered. They missed out on Champions League qualification, finishing 5th. In any other club, 5th place would be a disappointment. At Leeds, it was a death sentence. The dream had officially evaporated, but the massive loan repayments didn't. Suddenly, the hedge funds and the banks came knocking, demanding the millions they were owed. The club was bleeding cash at an atmospheric rate, losing an estimated £100 million in a single year. The panic in the boardroom was palpable. To keep the lights on and satisfy the creditors, Leeds had to do the unthinkable. They had to sell their soul. They began a desperate fire sale of their best assets, starting with their crown jewel, Rio Ferdinand, who was sold to their bitter rivals Manchester United for £30 million. But that was just the beginning. One by one, the heroes of the golden generation were auctioned off for fractions of their true value. Jonathan Woodgate, Robbie Keane, and Robbie Fowler were pushed out the door just to pay the interest on the debt. The squad was being gutted, and the fans watched in horror as the team that almost conquered Europe was dismantled in a matter of months. As the dressing room was being emptied of its stars, the leadership at the club was descending into total anarchy. David O'Leary, the man who had guided this young squad to the brink of European glory, was sacked after he dared to write a book about the internal struggles of the team. The board replaced him with Terry Venables, a legendary name, but even he couldn't stop the bleeding. The atmosphere at the training ground had shifted from one of youthful ambition to one of pure survival. Players who had been promised they were part of a revolution now found themselves in a locker room filled with rumors of bankruptcy and liquidation. The chaos wasn't limited to the pitch. Every day brought a new headline about the club's staggering debt, which had now ballooned past £80 million. The fans, once the loudest and most loyal in the country, began to turn on Peter Ridsdale. The Living the Dream slogan became a mockery, thrown back at the board as the club was forced to sell its own training ground and even the iconic Elland Road Stadium itself to private investors just to lease them back. It was the ultimate humiliation. A club that had been a landlord of its own destiny was now a tenant in its own home, paying rent to stay alive while the debt continued to grow like a terminal shadow. The 2003 to 2004 season was the final agonizing act of the tragedy. Leeds United was no longer a football club. It was a carcass being picked apart by creditors. By this point, the fire sale had reached a desperate level. To save themselves from immediate liquidation, the board had to sell every player with any market value left. James Milner, the local prodigy and future of the club, was sold against his will. Alan Smith, the homegrown hero who had once famously said he would never play for Manchester United, felt he had no choice but to move to Old Trafford just so the transfer fee could keep Leeds from going under. On the pitch, the consequences were devastating. A squad that had been competing with Real Madrid and AC Milan just 3 years prior was now a patchwork of loanees and demoralized youngsters. They weren't just losing games, they were being humiliated. The fear of the club literally ceasing to exist hung over every match. The breaking point finally came at Highbury against Arsenal. The 5-0 defeat was the final nail in the coffin. A club that had gambled its entire history on staying at the top was officially relegated from the Premier League. As the players slumped to the turf and the fans wept in the stands, the reality set in. The dream wasn't just over. It had destroyed everything it touched. Leeds United, a giant of English football, was heading into a wilderness that would last for 16 long, painful years. The relegation was only the beginning of a decade-long nightmare. Most fans believed they would bounce back within a year, but the financial rot went deeper than anyone realized. Because the club had sold off its stadium and training ground, they had no assets left to leverage. In 2007, the unthinkable happened. Leeds United, 3-time champions of England, collapsed into administration and were relegated again, this time to the third tier of English football. They started life in League One with a 15-point deduction, playing against teams they hadn't faced in decades. This period became a dark lesson for the entire football world. The term "doing a Leeds" entered the lexicon of every sports business school on the planet as a synonym for fiscal suicide. It served as the primary catalyst for the introduction of financial fair play regulations. The tragedy of Leeds wasn't just that they lost their place at the top, it was that they lost their identity. For years, the club was passed around between eccentric and often controversial owners, each promising a return to glory, but instead delivering more instability. The fans remained loyal, filling Elland Road even in the 3rd division, but the soul of the club was scarred. They had become a warning, a living example of what happens when a board of directors prioritizes a reaction to the market over the structure of the institution. The ghost of the 2004 collapse haunted Elland Road for nearly 2 decades. It took 16 years, multiple ownership changes, and a complete cultural overhaul to finally claw back to the Premier League.
Ball breaks for Ealing. Oh, what a finish! Patrick Bamford scores for Leeds. All the way for Alioski. Oh, what about that? Jack Harrison has surely racked up a massive win for Leeds United. There! Oh, yes! Oh, yes! Oh, yes! Oh, how about that from Liam Cooper? Oh, what about that? How's that for a finish? And Hernandez scores a goal for Leeds United!
The scars of the Ridsdale era remain a permanent part of the club's DNA. this story changed the way football is governed forever. It proved that no club, no matter how historic, is too big to fail. It exposed the lie that success can be bought with money that hasn't been earned. Leeds United eventually found their way back to the light, but the cost was a generation of heartbreak. Their story is a permanent reminder that in football, the most expensive thing you can ever do is try to live a dream you can't afford. When you trade your identity for a shortcut to glory, you don't just lose the game, you lose the club. This is the reality behind the golden generation that vanished. If you want to understand the structural decisions and the hidden truths that define the rise and fall of football's biggest empires, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Join us as we continue to break down the stories that changed the game forever.